Well, good afternoon and good evening to everyone. Happy to have you here today. Our webinar today is on the instructional shifts of the C3 framework for social studies teachers. And I'm so happy to see a wonderful group we have participating in today's webinar. We've got a lot of celebrities indeed. I see we have former NCSS President Mike Yell here. We've got some outstanding teachers out here in California with Tracy Middleton, Scott Petrie, and newly elected NCSS board member, Mary Ellen Daniels. Fantastic. And so many other names I recognize. Just terrific. Well, my name's Michelle Herzog, and I'm serving this year as president of National Council for the Social Studies. Having a fabulous year as we move our organization forward to continue to support social studies teachers across the nation. And we're just thrilled to be part of this project and that you're here with us too. Let me start by going over the overarching goal of this webinar and, of course, the project that it's connected with, which is the Literacy Collaborative C3 Framework Initiative. The goal is to create and operationalize a plan designed specifically for social studies teachers to implement the Common Core state standards for English language arts and literacy and history, social studies, science, and technical subjects, and doing that by utilizing, of course, our college, career, and civic life C3 framework for social studies. This grant was funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and we, of course, are quite grateful for that to occur. Now, just so you know, this webinar is produced in conjunction with a much deeper, in-depth investigation in which project pilot teacher groups can take information from the webinar and go deeper, investigating the content further and connecting it to its work. And later on, I will show you the website where you can go to participate in that. The pre-selected groups, of course, know about this and will be going there automatically if they like, but non-project participants, any of you who are not in one of those groups, are also able to access the project, spend more time, dig into the learning modules by visiting and registering at the Literacy and Learning Exchange website. Following the NCSS C3LC Grant Project Group. And in this way, you'll have access to the investigations that will be posted there, just not to the coaching supports provided by the grant. So lots of great things that will be available for everyone, whether you're in one of those dedicated groups or not. So just wanted to share that with you. And we'll share the website with you where you can go for that at the end of this webinar. So today we're talking about instructional shifts, and hopefully by the end of this short webinar, you will understand again some of the guiding principles of the C3 framework, identify the implications for classroom instruction, and understand how the instructional pedagogy of the framework may represent an instructional shift for you. So let me clarify something right now before we get too further into this. There's instructional shifts and there's instructional shifts. I know many of you personally and professionally are already doing a lot of great inquiry-based instruction. But for some, it will be a bit of a shift. For others, it will not. So I qualify this webinar by thinking shifts are in the eye of the beholder. So let's think about that as we go through these things. And that's kind of the position we want to take when we use the term instructional shifts. So I'm going to start with kind of a brief overview of the C3 framework itself. If you participated in the introductory webinar that I led a few weeks ago, a lot of this is going to seem familiar. And I know a lot of you have seen these slides too. But as you're looking at these, if it's the first time or second or third time, think about them in the context of, is this a shift in your instructional practice or perhaps for others, because they may not be shifts for you, but I'll bet you know some teacher down the hall where it might be. So just to recap, as you know, the C3 framework, this was a 3-year effort led by the SASE Collaborative at the Council of Chief State School Officers. 23 states sent their social studies experts, their state departments of ed. I was fortunate to be a part of the work representing the LA County Office of Ed. Fran O'Malley was part of it representing University of Delaware. And as you know, we pay attention to this part too because of the number of professional organizations, writers, teachers, editors, Over 3,000 teachers responded, gave feedback on the drafts. We emphasize this because we want to be clear and let people know that this really was a huge collaborative effort. Not that it made it any easier by doing so, but we felt that that was very, very important. Okay. Many of you know these organizations. They made up the task force of the C3 framework, and it was important to have them on board before, during, and after to not only inform the work, but to support the work. This, as Susan Griffin often says, was a watershed moment, let alone getting these folks in the same room. We're always fortunate to have them at the same conference when we have our annual NCSS conference. But to have them in the same room talking about a common project, a common mission, was very challenging, but exciting and opportunistic. So what a wild ride that was, and what a great one, too. The C3 framework, as you know, was initially designed for states as a guide for them to update their state social studies standards. But, you know, when you talk to folks from different states, you realize that they're all over the place. Colorado had just updated their standards when this effort started. Some hadn't, some certain states, won't name names, hadn't updated their state social studies standards since 1998 and have no plans in the immediate future to do so. So you've got the whole gambit of things. People are all over the place, different states. So we decided to, let's create this for teachers across the nation so that they could take what they have now as standards and just shift the pedagogy, deliver their instruction in different ways to get to some of those common goals. So when you're working with different audiences, obviously you've got to frame the work very intentionally for both of those. The objectives are, we want to enhance the rigor of the social studies disciplines. We want to build critical thinking, problem solving, and participatory skills to become engaged citizens. And we made a deliberate effort to align to the Common Core state standards. This was a big discussion. I won't say controversial, but certainly interesting because states were kind of in different places in their adoption of the Common Core. And now, ever since that time it was published, we're seeing more of that. But the important thing is, whether a state has adopted Common Core or not, we have to believe that all states are committed to building literacy skills, writing skills, speaking and listening, critical thinking, and understanding difficult text and being able to communicate. And so by aligning this work to Common Core, we're hoping it'll serve a purpose for that as well. The ultimate goal, as you know, of the C3 is for students to study civics, economics, geography, and history to become active and engaged citizens in the 21st century. And this is a big statement because it's not just about learning civics to become good citizens. It's about learning economics and geography and history as an integrated approach. And I think you'd agree that those are all, that's an important objective and goal for us. The foundations for the C3 are built on these principles: preparing young people for college, career, and civic life, inquiry, inquiry, inquiry. We all know from our own personal experience and teaching experience, that's the way to go. It makes it alive and interesting and compelling for kids. And we know that it is not free of content, but formed by core content found in those 4 disciplines. We also have appendices in there, as you know, for psychology, sociology, anthropology. The framework's composed of deep and enduring understandings and skills and concepts. All of these things made up to prepare for democratic decision-making. And we do have to admit, and I think many of us do, that social studies, as does all the subjects, share the responsibility for literacy education across the board. And that makes it kind of an exciting time where we can start to meld away some of those silos. Many of you have seen this before, I'm sure. These are the foundations of which it's built on: an inquiry arc, disciplinary literacy, and civic life. So if you're wearing your instructional shift lenses right now, you're starting to think, how much of this is what frames what I teach in the classroom now, or frame other people's teaching in their classrooms? Where can I stretch? Where am I doing all right? We'll look at those ideas a little bit. The inquiry arc is based on these 4 dimensions, and we'll walk through them a little bit. So I want to take a little bit of time right now to take you to the C3 framework itself. You should be able to see this. You can download the C3 framework there, and what we want you to do is glance through pages 17 to 19 in the framework and take a minute to look at these 2 questions. And I will put these questions up here for you to respond to, just to give you a quick overview of those 4 dimensions. So in our attempt to make this interactive, we want to invite you to respond to these questions, and you should be able to see other people's answers as well. Okay, so as you can see from a lot of these responses, I think a lot of you get it. For some, not so much a shift, but for others, very much so. And it's going to take a lot, particularly with your comfort level in the classroom around this whole idea of student-centered. Sometimes, it's a little nerve-wracking. We can lose a little control, and that can be uncomfortable for some folks. Needless to say, if this is a big uncomfortable piece, we want to encourage people to take baby steps, move slowly through this, because it really does shift the center of foci in a classroom. And managing that and facilitating that certainly takes a very different skill set from a traditional approach. Susan Griffin and I yesterday were at Millersville University in Pennsylvania doing a presentation on the C3 framework, and it was a marvelous group of pre-service social studies teachers. Most of them seemed very young, very anxious to get in classrooms. And as we went through this same kind of exercise, I asked them, how many of you remember when you took social studies class in high school, had an approach like this? Your teachers taught in this way. And I think of the 50 or 60 in the room, maybe there was 100, it was a big room. There were maybe 2 hands. And then when I asked how many of you would have loved to have your teachers teach this way, needless to say, they all raised their hands. So they're excited. I mean, they're looking for ways to do this. And of course, working with our pre-service teachers is really terrific. So yeah, I'm seeing a lot of great comments on here. Student-centered, similar to law-related education approach, but not what many teachers use. Very different for delivery and lesson planning for many. And you can see how exciting it might be. And then, of course, Common Core, those of you who are very familiar with Common Core are seeing some of the similarities, but maybe some of the differences too. Here's a comment I see on dimensions 2 and 3, close to Common Core in terms of disciplinary concepts and use of evidence. Yeah, very much so. That was very intentional to be sure that we touch on that. Sourcing, multiple perspectives, not passive learning. All the things you're mentioning here, I think, are very profound. I think, too, as we go through this webinar, because it will be archived at some point, for you to be able to take it back to your own schools and guide your colleagues through a similar kind of conversation as well. So let me put these aside for now, and we'll move forward a little bit in our discussion. Okay, so the other question will be, will these represent instructional shifts for you and your colleagues? And like I said, this is an overview, but if you get into the other investigation, I will share with you later some of the other guidelines and more detailed activities where you can dig into that a little more. So just to repeat, the guiding principles: inquiry is at the center. All right, when I think about my own social studies background as a student, that necessarily wasn't the case. Disciplinary integrity and interdisciplinary connections matter. This piece about informed action and application of knowledge is huge. And that may vary from subject to subject, from content to content. So you may not end every social studies lesson with, a protest down Main Street. But even if you have kids share it with another group or share a conclusion with other students or adults or make application to other ideas going on, all that, as you know, is powerful stuff. So let's go on, and I want to give you a few minutes to listen to one of the chief architects, brilliant man, S.G. Grant from Binghamton, and listen to him talk about the instructional shifts and what they mean for teachers.
Is that inquiry is really at the center of this whole thing. For far too long, we've let a fact-based, knowledge-based curriculum dictate the idea that we're trying to stuff ideas into kids' heads. Mm-hmm. We know that information, ideas, facts, all of that kind of stuff is radically important, but not unless you have a question that you're trying to answer. The second reason that this is different is we're going for both disciplinary integrity and interdisciplinary connections. Again, too often in the past, we've either gone way overboard in terms of everything is interdisciplinary, everything is part of everything else, and so it makes it hard to sort through and make any sense of things. Mm-hmm. Or we've gone to the other extreme where it's all been history or economics or geography or psychology, whatever. The idea in the framework is that both of those ideas matter. It's a tricky balance sometimes to figure out how to put them together, but that's what we really need to be doing. The third idea is that informed action is clear and present. As I said before, we can no longer accept the idea that kids are simply going to know some things and express what they know on a standardized test. We have to be able to see that kids are ready to stand up and take their role in society as citizens. And finally, in lots of ways, the inquiry arc represents an instructional arc. This is an idea that really, in lots of ways, pushes well beyond where the common standards documents go. We've been apparently afraid to talk about instruction when we've talked about standards, and I think the team thinks that time is over, and that the inquiry arc really can act as a framework for designing teaching units and teaching lessons. And the idea that you would use a framing question to begin your inquiry with your kids really is a step toward what we think is a huge instructional push.
So let's go on and let's kind of reiterate some of the key things that SG brought to mind. This whole idea of inquiry being at the center, mutually supportive ideas that frame the intersection of ideas and learners. This is pretty high-level stuff that's very interesting to spark curiosity and deepen the work and apply the knowledge in the real world. As you know, all that's going to prepare kids for the 21st century. We talk a lot in Dimension 1 about compelling questions that have to be intellectually meaty but kid-friendly, that's going to get kids excited about learning the subject. You've seen these examples before, but there's a lot of other good ones too out there, and it makes what we usually teach sometimes should be more compelling and exciting. And of course, supporting questions to back that up. That has to happen too. So here's some other examples. And more and more teachers are starting to develop lessons based on the C3. We have a new bulletin that came up with lots of great ideas from our major organizations that show lots of examples, all to help move us in that direction. Everyone likes to see examples. The guiding principle number 2, we've talked about this whole idea of integrating the different subject areas together. The example I use with teachers I work with is, if you think of any current issue that's on everyone's minds, whether it's some of these horrific genocidal events that are happening, these terrorism acts in the Middle East, Keystone Pipeline, any of them, you can't isolate it to just one discipline to fully understand it. There's a historical context to each of these. There's certainly a geographic influence on an impact on these events that are going on. You got to talk, of course, about the economic impact, things that economically led up to and are now impacted by, and resources, economic resources, and of course the civic and political implications. So when we teach social studies as a timeline of events, we aren't intentional about those other disciplines as interdisciplinary, we've really missed an opportunity to give a full understanding of those events and ideas that have occurred over time. And of course, again, tying to the Common Core, and even if you're not a Common Core state, tying to literacy. Let's face it, what better topics are there to talk about, speak about, write about, read about than ours, right? Of course, it's a no-brainer. So we can help that. And I know, just like you do, one of the biggest challenges for kids to get to that really good stuff is their reading ability. I'm sure you all have students that are reading below grade level. They can't read at grade level and understand that text. They're missing the good stuff. So there's lots of things we can do, and I think we're moving in the right direction there as well. Okay, so based on this issue and the connections to the Common Core, and let me remind you too, because this is funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and of course one of their major missions is to support implementation to the Common Core. So that's why you're going to hear and see a lot of connections to that in these webinars and these investigations. But let's listen a little bit to John Lee. He's another one of the chief architects of the C3 framework. He put a lot of energy and time into explicitly describing those connections. So let's listen to his comments.
Their topic, early on in this project, there were a number of social studies experts from the various state departments of ed who were involved in the work. They emphasized the need for the document to be aligned to the Common Core state standards that many of their states were in the process of adopting. We know there's about 45 states that have adopted it now. Not to supplant or default to, but we know that social studies education provides a wonderful context for promoting reading, writing, speaking, listening, and language skills. So it seemed only natural for the writers to intentionally demonstrate how the C3 framework is useful as a bridge for social studies teachers to meet the Common Core. You're going to meet in just a moment Dr. John Lee, who's going to talk briefly with us. He is the Associate Professor of Social Studies Education at North Carolina State University, another leader of the work. And John's going to come on to explain briefly to us how the C3 framework connects to those Common Core state standards for English language arts. Thank you, John, for joining us.
Thank you, Michelle. Glad to be here. The publication of the Common Core was really a watershed moment for us in social studies, given that it came on the heels of 10 years of No Child Left Behind, which resulted in significant marginalization in social studies, particularly in the loss of instructional time for elementary grades. The Common Core was a new challenge for social studies. By incorporating social studies as a part of the shared literacy responsibility in grades K-5 and actually listing standards in grades K-6 for history social studies, as Kathy said, some people wondered out loud whether social studies was just being folded into English language arts. Well, a funny thing happened on the road to social studies' demise. Turns out the ELA Common Core got it right. The document sets forth a clear and rigorous set of standards for literacy in all the grades and in all the areas, content areas, particularly in social studies for us. And they function as a foundation for us to do the more ambitious work that we want to do in social studies, namely to prepare young people for civic life. So what does the Common Core expect of social studies, and how are we to build on that foundation in the C3 framework? First, and probably most importantly, the Common Core establishes a set of basic disciplinary skills. that include the ability to cite textual evidence, the capacity to understand disciplinary vocabulary, the ability to distinguish among fact, opinion, and reasoned judgment, being able to distinguish competing or alternative claims, and the capacity to narrate historical events. In addition, the Common Core emphasizes research and anchor standard writing standard 7 and communication and speaking and listening standard 6. Common Core goes so far as to even emphasize democratic discourse, something, of course, we're pretty good at in social studies. In speaking and listening standard 1B for grades 11, 12, it even says that students will work with their peers to promote civil democratic discussions and decision making. So what we did when we developed the C3 framework was use a 3-part strategy to make connections between the ELA Common Core and the C3 framework. We took care to make the connections to all 36 anchor standards in the Common Core and did that in 3 ways. First, the C3 framework has been constructed in such a way as to incorporate in its entirety the ELA Common Core. So as you examine and implement the C3 in the various districts and systems in California, you'll see traces of all 36 Common Core anchor standards. And you'll see that these standards are not only present, but they're emphasized in unique ways. But again, we see all 36 of these standards as being foundational to social studies. Second, we think that some of the anchor standards are particularly supportive of the inquiry aims of the C3 framework. Specifically, all of the reading anchor standards, actually, 1 through 10, writing standard 1 and standards 7 and 9, as well as speaking and listening standards 1 through 6 and language standards 6. The third thing that you're going to see in the C3 framework is that we have emphasized a small number of Common Core anchor standards that we see as absolutely vital to inquiry in social studies, specifically reading standard 1, which is about citing evidence, writing standard 7, which is about research, and speaking and listening standard 1, which is about participating in conversations with diverse partners. So the C3 framework connects to the ELA Common Core in addition by using shared language. We use terms such as argumentation, evidence, sources, discourse, and we're doing this to replicate and complement what the Common Core has done. You're also going to find numerous graphical and narrative explanations for how the connections work out across the disciplines. Given the nice foundation that the Common Core provides us for literacy learning, the C3 framework aims to expand on the notion of literacy by setting forth 2 kinds of literacies. First, inquiry literacies. We have these specific inquiry literacies that play out in dimensions 1, 3, and 4. Things such as questioning, as SG talked about, gathering information, using evidence, communicating conclusions, and taking informed action. But in addition, we focus on specific disciplinary literacies. These include, in history, using deliberative processes, in civics, using deliberative processes, participating in school settings and following rules. In economics, making economic decisions, using economic data and identifying prices in a market. In geography, constructing maps using geographic data and classifying historical sources. And in history, classifying historical sources, determining the purposes of an historical source, and analyzing cause and effect. We think that the most effective and meaningful way for social studies educators to implement the ELA Common Core is through the C3 framework. As we like to say, it's literacy through the social studies. So I hope this explanation of the connections between the ELA Common Core and the C3 framework has been useful, and I look forward to answering your questions.
That's great. Thank you, John, so much. You know, social studies teachers everywhere are being asked to help meet the Common Core, and this is a wonderful document to help give some great direction and support for that work. And this is the interesting thing, too. I've noticed that even if the C3 framework is not implemented at the state level, it's an extraordinary resource for all social studies teachers at the local level to help connect to Common Core, things they're being called upon to do, while at the same time strengthening their discipline. So I think it'll be a valuable tool at all different levels and stages.
Both of these video clips are from an hour-long standalone webcast that we produced here at the Los Angeles County Office of Ed. You can pull it down directly, of course, from the NCSS website, socialstudies.org/C3. So let's take a minute to reflect on a couple key questions here prompted by Dr. Lee. What did you see as the key connections to Common Core articulated by him? And why do you think it was so important for the writers to make those strong connections? You should be able to see, there we go, you should see them coming in up here. You know, I think too, having these connections makes a strong argument for bringing social studies back as a core subject in schools. I don't know if you face this, but you know, we've all seen a little bit of marginalization of the social studies. Putting this front and center as a way to improve literacy. Of course, it isn't our primary purpose as social studies educators, but it does seem to resonate with others. And so I hope you agree that sometimes whatever it takes to get us moving in social studies front and center, hopefully this is a helpful strategy and approach to reinforce. Great, you have some great ideas going on. Oh, there you go. Seeing social studies a way to keep it alive in schools. I agree. Not that we should need a reason, but hey, we take what we can get. It's all helpful, don't you think? And of course, we're not proposing the idea that that we all become entirely reading teachers or writing teachers. This is just one way, one vehicle for us to get to meeting our goals, I think, for social studies and what we hope to do. So I appreciate the comments here. Here's a comment about literacy skills connecting to Dimension 2 really well, having multiple entry points here. Now here's a reference to Dr. Sherry Colby. Not familiar with her, but that sounds like a good resource too. And this webinar is a great way. Throw some other connections too, if you know of any, because we'll capture those and can keep those shared with our audience. I'm going to give a shout out to Mary Ellen Daniels and anyone else working in Illinois. I know they're working real hard right now to update their state social studies standards aligned to the C3. So we're excited to see that work roll out too. Okay, here's a question. How and when can we provide teachers with professional learning around these shifts? Well, we want you to stay tuned. We have about 18 of these webinars and investigations that we are currently putting together and starting to roll out. I know that Anna has produced a list and a schedule and a calendar. So keep your eyes open for that, because we're going through these kind of overview ones here at the beginning, but we are definitely going to drill it down on these different aspects. We're going to have a series of separate webinars and investigations on different aspects of reading, writing, speaking, and listening. For example, we have Chauncey Montesano leading one for us on argumentative writing in the social studies. So we're excited to roll these out. You'll see them. And we know that in New York, they are right now building a New York C3 resource toolkit. And they're going to have some terrific things available at no cost to everyone. And I believe that will be, I know, Rosella, you're probably involved in that, those of you from New York. That should be rolling out too, I think, this summer. So, and also keep connected to socialstudies.org/C3, because as soon as we learn the things, we're throwing it up there to really provide the support that it needs. All right, so thank you for your comments, everyone. That's terrific. I'm going to put these away for now and kind of move on a little bit. Obviously, Principle 4, frame for teaching of learning, is the instructional arc. We've talked about this. Evaluating sources, using evidence, communicating conclusions, taking informed actions. So here again, if this is not the way you currently teach, maybe there's some parts that are, some parts not so much. We're challenging teachers to really reflect on your current practice and see if these are little shifts, big shifts, stretches. What can you do to really enliven your social studies instruction? And I think the examples that are rolling out are really going to help with that. You may have seen this little 5-minute video. I want to show it again to you. It's our 5th grade classroom from Glendora here in California. And the lesson is about why should people vote, and young people who go ahead and take informed action. If you've seen it before, you know what it's about. But this time, I want you to watch it with this new lens. Think about what evidence do you see of those guiding principles that may or may not be shifts for teachers in classrooms. So Anna, thank you for sharing this to us one more time, and then we'll think about that.
The College Career and Civic Life C3 Framework for Social Studies State Standards was a collaborative effort over 3 years. It included social studies teachers from across the nation, heads of social studies at state departments of education, institutes of higher education, and a number of social studies professional organizations who all lent their expertise and excitement for increasing the rigor and relevance of social studies for students across America. We all know how it's important to prepare kids for college and career. We also believe that social studies is the subject best suited to prepare them to be effective citizens in the 21st century. The lesson you're about to see, led by Rebecca Valbuena at Glendora School District, will show you what it looks like in the classroom for fifth grade students as they develop their understanding of constitutional principles and apply it in the real world to prepare them to be engaged citizens in the 21st century.
We're going to be doing some reading today, so I would like you to take out the Constitution book from your book basket. The series of lessons is designed to help students investigate the importance of civic involvement and that they understand their role as citizens now and into adulthood. Throughout the lessons, they learn how and why people participate in the democratic process. They study the fundamental principles of the Constitution and how the Constitution changed over time. One of the biggest goals of the series is that students can describe a government that is by the people, a government in which citizens exercise their power by voting. We do have rights, and our rights are one, and it's voting that protects those rights. So having the power to vote is part of living in a democracy. The ultimate goal is that students are involved now and that they continue to be involved into adulthood. In a perfect world, I'd want them to register to vote the second they turn 18 and exercise that right to vote into adulthood.
Dimension 1 begins with a question, an inquiry. We want students to get excited about learning social studies, and so we start with what we call a compelling question. Today's compelling question will ask students, why is it important to vote, and does it really matter? The idea is to get them excited about learning their subject.
Voting matters because your voice can be heard and you can make decisions based on how you feel and your opinions. Yeah.
Dimension 2 is about applying disciplinary tools and concepts, not just looking through the lens of history or economics or geography or civics or the other humanities, but looking at them in interrelated ways and also connecting to reading language arts. Dimension 3 is about evaluating sources and gathering evidence to respond to the compelling question.
Our data. So Gavin, would you go ahead and explain the data to us?
In the age range 18 to 25, we had 8 people say that voting does matter, and 6 people say that it doesn't matter.
The fourth and final dimension, probably the most exciting, is communicating conclusions and taking informed action to get out in the world and really make a difference.
I want you to exercise your right to vote.
They wanted to help solve the societal problem that they discovered for themselves. They were able to conclude that, yes, voting does matter. They didn't really understand why, if people were registered to vote, that they didn't go out and vote. This idea of voter apathy came into play. And we decided as a class that we could do something about it. When you can dig deeply into the curriculum and students have a voice and it's driven by their questions, that we're able to make it more meaningful and fun. And when learning's meaningful and fun and motivating, it's successful.
Whether your state has adopted the C3 framework or not, we hope you can utilize this document as a framework for increasing the rigor and relevance of social studies, making it exciting and engaging for your students, and sharing with them skills and ideas for taking real action in the real world. Our goal is to create an engaged, informed citizenry, and providing opportunities for students to do that. This framework allows you to take the work that you're doing and try to enhance it in ways that can build those civic skills, knowledge, and dispositions.
Okay, so maybe some of you saw that new. I think it's adorable seeing those kids work on those projects. And what you can't really tell what we try to imply in there, they went ahead and created PSAs to increase voter turnout, and those little brochures, those trifolds they were making, they were giving out and making, talking to adults and trying to get them out there. So we've been talking about these 4 guiding principles. What I'd like you to think about now, based on what you saw in the video. What did you see in that video that reminded you or reflected some of those guiding principles? So looking at that as a 5th grade example, what evidence did you see of those principles in that 5th grade video example? All of them. Okay, come on, be specific. Tell us. Student-centered, yes. Okay, cool. Inquiry. Terrific. Yeah, great responses. Thanks everyone for sharing your thoughts on that. I totally agree. A lot of inquiry, a lot of student-centered, a lot of compelling questions. You know, if you've worked in elementary schools, you know young kids are usually more motivated, very motivated to learn new things, but you know, they get bored. They get tired of the drill and kill too. You know, there was a part of that lesson where they also went out and interviewed the principal, interviewed other adults to find out from them if voting mattered, what was their role and responsibility. They further went on and they created also a constitution for the school and a student bill of rights for the 5th grade, which is hysterical. So yeah, they're doing, that teacher is wonderful. Rebecca's just a fabulous teacher. And I'm sure you know elementary teachers like her as well. Perhaps you're one yourself. Okay, so this is another way in which we invite you to use videos like this and speak to your colleagues. Here's the guiding principles. Did you see this as a shift for this teacher or not? What things stood out for you? Where could you go from there? Something else to think about. Okay, so we're going to finish up here pretty soon. Now, if you go to that investigation, as I've mentioned now twice, you'll find some other activities that will really deepen this conversation for you. So, for example, there's a handout there and an article about monitoring instructional shifts. It was also an article and handout printed in Social Ed last September. So if you're an NCSS member, you can pull it down from there as well. Or you can go to that investigation and walk through this activity too. And think deeply about what does the C3 look like when it's happening? What are some of the challenges for your school to get there? I saw some comments in there about getting administrators on board and helping them understand. We're doing a webinar just for administrators because we need their support if we're going to be successful, particularly school-wide. What opportunities are there that lay a good foundation? So that's a future activity you can explore to go deeper. Another handout and conversation there is, what would your school or district look like in 5 years if you were fully implementing the C3 framework? What would it look like? What would you see? What kinds of structures would need to be in place? These are bigger institutional questions, but I think worthy of discussion. Another slide is getting right down to what am I currently doing to support the guiding principles? How can I stretch or shift my instructional practice to strengthen these principles? So there's an exercise in there to give you time to really dig deep and reflect and think and talk about it. Much more time than we have on this particular webinar. Again, this whole idea of what does this look like for you? Are there other shifts I should also be thinking of? What am I shifting from? What am I shifting to? So you can see you can spend a lot of time reflecting and looking at this piece in very big ways. So just to finish up, we want to invite you to a couple different things. So let me pull these into the stream here. First of all, if you want to visit the Literacy and Learning Exchange, you should be able to see this section here, which has a link. If you go to Browse to, it'll take you there. And like I mentioned, whether you're part of one of these dedicated groups or not, you're welcome to go there. You may not get the coaching support, as has been designed in the project, but you'll find more things. Also want to talk to you a little bit on April 15th at 6:30 Eastern Time. We have another webinar coming up that's being led by S.G. Grant, who you saw in one of the videos. And he's gonna talk about, let me see, what is his topic here? Developing questions and planning inquiries. So many of you mentioned, what is a good compelling question? How do I design it? Since this is part of his big piece, we are very fortunate to have him come and lead that conversation. So you certainly want to schedule that. And if you want to register, go down to this link here and start registering your folks right away. Like I said, we're drilling down on all these different individual pieces to really provide as much guidance as we think should occur. So finally, I want to thank Anna Post. She's put a lot of work into this project, and I think things ran very smoothly today, thanks to you, Anna, so I appreciate that. And of course, I want to thank all of you for joining this webinar, sharing your comments, looking at this list. Boy, half of you could have presented this yourselves. You got such great expertise out there, but we appreciate everyone coming to the table, and we're all working together to make this work, to get social studies on the map. So look for other webinars coming up. I hope this one was useful to you, to give you new information or else some ideas in which you can frame and share it with your colleagues. All right? So I will end here. Wish you all a lovely evening, good weather, and good travels if you're traveling anywhere soon. And we hope to see you again soon. So thank you very much.